Hi everyone, welcome to GG+A Strategic Planning for your Strategic Plan webinar. Today your presenters are going to be Scott Atwell and Barney Ellis-Perry. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to write them either in the chat box or Q&A box at the bottom of your screens, and Scott and Barney will address them either throughout the presentation or at the end. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Scott and Barney.
All right, Griffin, thank you very much, and a very pleasant good morning, everybody, or perhaps it is afternoon, depending on where you are at, from Hong Kong to New Zealand and everywhere in between. I'm Scott Atwell, Senior Vice President and Co-Practice Area Leader for the Alumni Relations Practice at Grenzebach, Glier & Associates, and I'm joined by my colleague and Co-Practice Leader, Barney Ellis-Perry, and together, through the magic of the World Wide Web, we welcome you to this session of strategic planning, a critical tool for any organization, but especially for those with very large and involved constituencies. This webinar is a first for GG+A in the Asia Pacific market, our first foray into this kind of professional development. So before we get started, Barney and I would like to recognize our GG+A colleagues who are well known in the region. Andrew Allred is the Senior Vice President for Asia Pacific, and Amy Parker, who is a Vice President, and she is tuning in tonight from her home base in Hong Kong. Their emails are indicated on this page, and we encourage you to reach out to them for follow-up on this webinar, or even Barney, who will be in the region soon. Here's my friend Barney Ellis-Perry from the West Coast of the United States.
Good morning, good evening. Thanks very much, Scott. Yes, actually, I have had the great pleasure of working in the Asia Pacific region for the last 14 years with the University of British Columbia in the Asia Pacific office, and at the time, I think 17 chapters throughout the Asia Pacific region, and most recently with the University of California, Irvine. So I will be at the Asia Pacific Conference and love to chat with anyone, and also happy to stop in Hong Kong if there are folks who want to have a chat on either way on the trip. So our goal in this webinar is to give you practical advice about how to start a strategic plan, complete a strategic plan, and implement that same strategic plan. This webinar application, as Scott mentioned, allows you to send us questions. So please do that, and we will answer them as we move along. We're not a huge group today, so that can create a really nice conversation. So please chime in. So you may have seen in the promotional copy, but we just want to make sure that you know the outcomes of what we want you to achieve today. So firstly, learning the individual steps of strategic planning, we'll map those out. Realize the power of actually effective missions, visions, and values. Discover the necessity of an environmental scan. Learn the components of a strategic goal driven by metrics, and incorporate design thinking into the strategy. And then turn a strategic plan into a work plan. And finally, understand how to complement your development colleagues and other areas in your institution. So as Scott mentioned, while we consult in alumni relations specifically, we also realize a number of the folks on the call today are from cultural organizations and museums and healthcare organizations, et cetera. In my practice, I do about half the time fundraising, but also alumni relations is the main focus, but I tend to do both. So we're going to try and cover everything off today. All right, Mr. Atwell.
All right, well, let's get started with a pretty simple concept, and that is, where do you want to end up in this process? As consultants, we have learned that many organizations are doing things without considering what they're really trying to achieve. So before starting a strategic plan, you need to ask yourself where you want to go with it, or as Stephen Covey, famed business writer, has described to us, begin with the end in mind.
Excellent. Oh, sorry, on the wrong page. So how does this apply to our discussion today? Let's consider the reasons you may need a strategic plan, because each set of these objectives may very well require you to tack in a slightly different direction. Number one is campaigns. They are often the catalyst for strategic planning, whether it's at the beginning of a campaign or at the end of a campaign. Specifically for those of you in the alumni business, your most important work very well might be in that period between the campaigns where you're working on your pipeline for the next campaign. And that's a really important area that often elevates the work of alumni relations. Next up is the future. As always, it's going to be a destination, but how do you chart your course to get there? Are you on the right path? As consultants, we spend a lot of time speaking with colleagues who worry about the decreased investment in the alumni relations enterprise. Now more than ever, we must demonstrate value. And as you will see, the planning process is a way to tease out a narrative that's useful for the chancellors and other leadership who sometimes don't always appear to appreciate the long-term value of the work that we do. Next up is strategy. Strategy itself is a reason for planning. The impact of technology is forcing us to think in new ways and often change our paradigms. As practitioners, we need to direct resources in new and innovative ways to support our objectives. Then there's organizational leadership. This can be a president or a chancellor, a change in leadership, a new vice president of your area, a transition in the chief alumni officer role maybe. With change comes new priorities, which can be sometimes a difficult conversation if you're already in the middle of your 5-year strategic plan, so you may need to stop and do some new planning and pivot. But the reality is we all have bosses, and thus flexibility is super important. Finally, does anyone out there have board members who do not fully understand their role? If so, boy, do you need to have a plan, because this process can illustrate to them how they can be an asset to the organization where their nose is in, but their fingers out of the process.
All right, let's talk about the stakeholders now. If the constituents don't believe they have ownership of the plan, it is likely to fail. You know, Winston Churchill once said that plans are of little importance, but planning is essential. Planning brings everyone along in the process. It's about engaging your constituents in that process. And for alumni professionals, it includes, wow, the alumni body itself, especially volunteers. You have the aforementioned university leadership, which could include all of the vice presidents. You've got your alumni association staff, the team that actually does the work. You've got academic deans, students, faculty, non-alumni and friends, even the community. You see, there are a lot of mouths there to feed. You have to bring them along. You have to identify the people who are going to want ownership of this plan, because a plan that is handed down from a small group of leaders will not have ownership.
Exactly. So let's talk about the timeline, which is a good time to offer a disclaimer. There is not a single way to undertake strategic planning. There are as many ways as there are people watching this webinar. We have chosen today a middle-of-the-road process, and that's not just because I'm Canadian, with the understanding and even encouragement that you have the license to mix and match. As consultants, we never present a one-size-fits-all approach. The work is always customized. That said, this is not instant noodles. You can expect to simmer this process for at least 6 months to a year, and these are the basic steps that we will cover today. Discover, retreat, ideate, and implement.
Indeed, by discovery, we mean assessing where you are as an organization, not just where you think you are as an administrator or staff member, but where others think you are. Essentially, this is a scan of the environment, and it's one of the most useful exercises you'll ever go through.
The retreat phase, this is an effective planning process including a manageably sized committee or task force that goes off to think deep thoughts, consuming the information obtained in the discovery phase and talking about where we want to go next. It's all about imagining.
And then the rubber meets the road in the ideate stage. That is crunching the big ideas and arriving at a handful of concrete priorities that will guide the work of the organization over the next 3 to 5 years.
And finally, there's the implementation, turning your strategic plan into a work plan that is measurable and accountable. So again, feel free to send questions as we go along. So the first step on this joyride is discovery.
Discovery. Well, it was George Bernard Shaw who gave us some great advice when he said the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And that observation is at the heart of the discovery process. You know, in our lives, we know people, right, who tend to give us their opinion way too often. But the truth of the matter is, human beings most often are afraid to articulate exactly what they're thinking, which is why the environmental scan is such an important tool in this process. It helps organizations find a common language among its constituents. Let me pause here to say, while you are able to conduct a strategic plan on your own and the tools we're giving you today will help you in that process, this part of the planning is really where the value of outside counsel comes in, because the fidelity of responses will always be higher when a third party is asking the questions, especially if interview subjects have something critical to say. And think about it, if you don't hear what others are honestly thinking, it's going to be difficult to craft a plan that addresses organizational challenges so they can be turned into opportunities. Now, we want you to hire us to do your entire plan, but this part definitely needs to be done by a third party, and it is absolutely critical.
So here's some ways that we do this. By organizational assessment, we mean review the structure of the team, volunteers, budget, and programs to understand where the priorities currently lie. If you are at an institution of higher education, the institution's strategic plan should be considered in this phase. A SWOT to assess the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and we'll do a bit more on that in a minute. But also face-to-face leadership interviews with the president, vice president, board executive staff, and other key stakeholders. These are usually 30 minutes to an hour each with a set of common questions that will illuminate priorities and observations. And again, having an outside person doing that can often get you answers that you are not going to get otherwise.
Now, a gap analysis can come out of the face-to-face interviews, but can also be done as an electronic survey to capture more data. We use a product that allows 100 to 200 respondents, the results of which can look something like this. Essentially, it's a process that allows the stakeholders to have a say in what matters most to them and how well you're delivering in their opinion. And we should also point out that some organizations might survey their entire constituency in some sort of alumni attitudinal survey or a constituent survey that returns statistically relevant data. GG+A has a survey lab team that conducts alumni surveys more economically than anyone. And finally, The board self-assessment, which is especially useful if you're having difficulty getting your volunteers to fly at 30,000 feet and out of the weeds. All of this data is then aggregated into a situational analysis report. And let me head off a question right now. You might be looking at this and getting overwhelmed and say, does all of this really have to be done? The answer is no, but it's about the level of fidelity to which you aspire. Cost is not an issue. All of this would be useful in capturing the truest picture of an organization. The client, however, must always be the one who decides what level of fidelity is required.
So let's look a little closer at the SWOT analysis. I'm sure each of you have gone through a process like this at some time or another, but we'll just do a quick recap. The strengths and weaknesses are usually internal forces, things we can control organizationally, while the opportunities and threats are usually external forces, but not always. What we like to do is code the responses and distill them into a single word that helps you visualize the expressed sentiment in a word cloud. Of course, we also provide the detail of the responses, but this shows you how quickly you can assess the consensus. If you look at the top left, it makes sense that the passion would be a strength of an organization. But in the bottom left, in this case, they can do a better job of collaborating across campus or with other organizational colleagues. This exercise helps to understand where the organization is at this very moment, but also where it can go. If you use it, make sure it's turned into action as part of the priorities that you eventually settle on in the strategic plan.
Alrighty, next up is the retreat phase, which we mean both literally and metaphorically. Retreats provide an opportunity to step back and ponder philosophically about your organization. You know, the data has been gathered. Now we start to distill it into its finer essence with a strategic planning committee sequestered in a place where total focus can be applied. We talked earlier about the fact that not one size fits all. We've seen committees as large as 75, or one as small as just the executive committee. It really depends on how your facilitator manages the group. But a working retreat is going to provide a useful setting to do the following work in partnership with the planning committee that you select.
The beginning of the committee retreat should focus on setting a vision. And our advice is to think big. Albert himself suggested your vision should be so grand in its scope that some might call it absurd. I love that. The vision statement is one sentence, which describes where you want to be when the strategic plan you're working on reaches its conclusion. It's a crystal ball that looks into the future, and there is scientific evidence to back it up. In 1987, a couple of professors at Case Western Reserve came up with the concept of appreciative inquiry, and it's becoming an important management tool for facilitating change. AI is defined partially as the collective design of a desired future state. Collective meaning the group is articulating where it wants to go. A goal so compelling that it does not require the use of incentives, coercion, or persuasion for plan change to occur. You can see how powerful then a vision statement can be, how actionable, I can't even say the word, how much you can action it if you do it well. How embarrassing. So here's some examples. The National Multiple Sclerosis Society, a world free of MS, just 5 words. The Nature Conservancy, to leave a sustainable world for future generations, 8 words. Habitat for Humanity, a world where everyone has a place to live, 10 words. Do you see how these statements are an end in themselves? These organizations are envisioning a day when they go out of business because their work is no longer needed. I can't tell you how many vision statements I read where the text is present tense, explaining what needs to be done instead of articulating an aspirational end.
Now, Habitat for Humanity may be the only of these organizations that you recognized. I encourage you to go out and look at some vision statements from organizations near to you, and I think what you will find is they are not as economical in terms of the number of words that you see right here. But if the vision statement is looking down the road, the mission statement is examining the present. It has been said that the most important question you can ever ask is why, and the mission statement explains the why your organization exists. Hopefully, in one sentence, but we'll get more on that in a second. This is a good opportunity to engage your planning committee in an important exercise around the question of why. What I'd like you to do is go around the table. Ask this planning committee, this group of volunteers, ask them this question: why are you involved in this organization? And then go back around again and ask the question from a different perspective. That is, why does the organization want you involved? See, two questions from two different perspectives.
The reason this is important in the alumni space is because we often find organizations with an imbalance in this equation. Our alumni relations practice is currently working with a client in Europe that has tilted all of its resources to what the alumni population wants, with no regard to what alumni can do for the institution. At the same time, we hear from alumni who say the only thing the institution wants from me is money. Does that sound familiar? The optimal space is in which an alumni organization should operate is in the middle, and what we call a mutually beneficial relationship. Why are those alumni involved? And why does the institution want them involved? Those two answers meet in the middle for success. There's actually a formula for the mission statement, and here it is. Action plus targeted beneficiary equals mission. In more practical terms, why you exist and who you exist for.
Now, for the non-alumni folks who are out there, this is where you can also add in some additional components of your mission through the services that are provided or the problems that are solved or others with whom you partner. But a caution here, remember, the definition of the mission statement should be one sentence. How many mission statements have you seen that are 3-4 sentences in length, maybe a paragraph? But what are the chances that anyone in your organization is going to remember something that lengthy? And if no one remembers it, how can it be actionable? Our advice is for the mission statement to be this simple. It should fit on a t-shirt, and your volunteers should be willing to wear it. Think it can't be done? Well, let's take a look at a few. Let's begin with TED. TED is a worldwide organization, these great TED Talks. Guess what their mission statement is? Just 2 words: spreading ideas. The Humane Society, celebrating animals, confronting cruelty, just 4 words. The Smithsonian Institution, the increase and diffusion of knowledge, just 6 words. Here in the United States and California, we've got the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Their mission statement is to inspire conservation of the oceans, only 6 words. And finally, the Wounded Warrior Project. That's a US-based organization that helps wounded soldiers. Their mission statement: to honor and empower wounded warriors. Now, can you see how our formula that we gave you follows this particular mission statement? In case of the Wounded Warrior Project, the actions are honor and empower, and the beneficiary is the wounded warriors. So we're going to throw down a challenge to see if your mission can come in under 10 words. Our mission here at Grenzebach, Glier and Associates, GG+A, our mission is just 5 words. It goes like this: our mission is advancing yours. And if you can get it within these confines, you can do so much more with it. You could put it on business cards, under the headline of your website. It can, in fact, become the calling card for your organization.
And of course, Scott and I are wearing that on the t-shirts we're wearing right now, of course.
That's right. There it is. Our mission is advancing you.
So let's take a step back a minute and look at this from the strategic level. You can see on the pyramid where the vision and mission form the leading edge of your work. The meat of the plan, the goals and the objectives are still to come. But along the bottom, the entire structure has a foundation built on values, and that's our next exercise. Core values should describe the collective attitudes and beliefs you desire. The key word here is desire. So think about your organization. What do you believe in? Here is a list of potential values. We could create 10 more lists, but the idea here is to get you thinking.
And we want to show you how to actualize this in the context of some of the other things we talked about. We had a client go through the environmental scan that we talked about earlier. One of the things we uncovered during that exercise was a concern about the commitment of some board members. You see, they attended meetings sporadically. They maybe indicated they would attend this event or that event and then never showed up. So during the retreat, we had the opportunity to introduce this concern in the form of stating a new value. And here's some of the values that could have been chosen. I don't exactly remember which one was chosen, but it started a conversation around the idea of holding each other accountable. And through that conversation, the board members agreed that they were comfortable with a fellow volunteer holding them accountable for what they said they would do. This was a way for the board to take ownership of its own actions. The staff no longer had to call them out, pull them along, get them involved. The board said they were willing to do this on their own. So you see, the value statement can speak to the qualities you desire in your organization, not the ones that you may have right now, but the ones that you desire. That is progress indeed.
Okay, I just checked the question box and it's a little empty there. So if anyone's got questions, please don't be shy. So we're about to transition from the philosophical to the practical, the rubber meeting the road. In the next section we call ideate. So using a design thinking rubrics can lay the foundation for a flexible, creative approach to your strategic planning. The core of design thinking is all about being creative, but based on research and testing ideas, knowing that some will fail. Design thinking can be a good framework for your ideation conversations. And there's no one way to do it. It's important to have a facilitator so you as the leader can think and observe and not have your sleeves rolled up in the middle of it. So a good facilitator can work with you to create a structure for your retreat that is fast and dynamic and hopefully really pushing people's thinking. So you sort of want their brains to hurt by the end of the day. Ideally, your participants have been spoon-fed the research and the work that has been done prior to the ideation session. And you want to curate the group carefully and be very mindful about the dynamics and agendas of each participant. The goal is to really work the group hard and truly problem solve and develop exciting solutions and vision. You want the participants' brains to hurt at the end of the day. It's also important to do like time-boxed creative sprints with 10,000 yellow stickies, getting all the ideas out. You'll need to push people past their initial top 3 ideas. Those are the easy ones. The magic big idea usually comes at around 100. Another idea as well to add to this is having a graphic facilitator, and this can be really engaging for the folks in the room. The resulting diagram can be an excellent way to share what came out of the session with stakeholders who were not there. And it's also great to have in your final report in your office, and if it's done in a certain way, it's really great where you can add to it to show your progresses on the years 1, 2, and 3.
All right, checking the question box again, nothing there, but feel free. If you type in a question, we actually will answer them as we go along, so don't be shy. It is now time to take everything that we have talked about and use the materials as building blocks to construct an actual strategic plan. And this is going to be your license as an organizational leader to question all the good ideas that come your way and say, wait a minute, is this something that falls into one of our priorities in our strategic plan? You see, there's an old saying that there's no shortage of great ideas, only the people and the resources to implement them. And you may also have heard the phrase that if everything is important, then nothing is. The definition of important is literally something that stands out as significant or profound. The strategic plan is built to block out all of the white noise of our professional lives, to help us focus on the things that are in fact important. And all of the work we've done up to this point, the environmental scan, the vision, mission, values, the design thinking, should have uncovered or identified 3 to 5 important areas in which your organization should focus. So here's a look at one framework for articulating a strategic priority. And again, there are many variations of this. We encourage you to mix and match to fit your unique needs. That's what we do whenever we go into a client environment. And we also suggest that in your final document, you include a glossary of the key terms you're using, because there is not a single nomenclature, and you want to ensure that stakeholders have a clear understanding of the language that's being used. Remember that phrase we used before, common language. So at the top of this column is the strategic goal or priority, the big picture. It's a goal that will help the organization reach the vision statement that we authored earlier. And since the goal is a brief sentence or just a few descriptive words, we find it useful to add some context with a goal statement. We'll actually be giving you an example of this in a minute. The objectives box is for a list of the ways that you will pursue the goal, and those can in fact be quantifiable items. Tactics are specific actions that accomplish the objectives, and the measurements will tell us if we're succeeding in pursuit of the goal. All right, so here is a little bit of help for those of you who are struggling with your board members who are trying to get into the weeds. This is the slide that you show them. You show your board of directors illustrating the 30,000-foot level from which they are expected to manage, because it's not always self-evident. In fact, I recently heard a story from an alumni director just a few weeks ago about board members who would routinely pick up the telephone and call their staff and make requests for initiatives that they, board members, wanted to pursue individually. And this alumni director described how it created anxiety among staff who, on the one hand, did not want to disappoint those board members, but who were also very confused about who it was that they worked for. So we mentioned earlier the phrase, noses in, fingers out. These blue shaded areas are where the board is allowed to sniff around, but keep their fingers out of the tactics.
So let's give you a real life example of this. Here's a pretty common goal in alumni organizations, increasing the ability to track engagement outcomes. That's a brief description. Stating that goal in more detail may look something like this. Counting for the sake of counting is not a strategic goal. We will create a system that identifies and measures desired outcomes of our alumni engagement. Okay, so how do we do that? Here's some objectives. Firstly, include an engagement metric and capital campaign. We often call this a dual goal campaign. 2, create a campus partnership that accounts for alumni engagement, collaboration. 3, establish a 5-year goal with incremental benchmarks. You got a time period. 4, identify desired outcomes and protocols for tracking what it is we want to achieve and how do we measure it. So that's where the board or strategic planning committee's work should end. After that, staff should have the free rein to decide how it can accomplish the goals and objectives based on its understanding of the unique limitations that are present, and every organization has its limitations. Then, in conjunction with the board or committee, there should be agreement on how the progress toward this particular goal will be measured. In this case, because the goal is about measurement, it's a measurement of the measuring.
Absolutely, and that bottom box is so critical because if you're not careful, all of the boxes above will keep your staff so busy with the mere appearance of getting things done, but the only way you'll know measurements like boxes we're showing it here is small in size, but it's huge in stature, and you must return to it often as a leader of your organization. Now let me pause here to say that I've seen some strategic plans that are so detailed, so vast that they can be overwhelming to look at, especially for your staff. And that's why I find it helpful to give a timeline to some of these outcomes. Let's go to the right side of the screen now, and let me show you here. So this is what I mean by that. It's okay to say this objective right here is incremental. We can get that done this year. But these here, well, they're going to take a little bit of work. We're going to wait till next year for that. And then getting the president to buy into, let's say, a dual goal campaign, that's transformative work. It's going to take a couple of years of labor leading up to the campaign's launch. What this does, it allows your staff to breathe and celebrate incremental victories along the path to achieving that vision that you outlined. Now, if you use this column approach to your strategic plan, your committee should land on 3 to 5 of these columns, maybe 6, but any more than 5 or 6, and you're approaching that place where everything seems to be important and it's going to be difficult to find success.
All right, so that leads us to the final phase of planning, the implementation. By some estimations, 90% of strategic plans fail because of poor implementation strategy. As we mentioned earlier, your plan has been created within the context of a larger institutional plan. So think of your plan as cascading down from the larger strategic plan. And to assure accountability, it needs to continue to cascade down into actual unit and individual work plans that can be measured and monitored on at least a quarterly basis. This is where, in an ideal world, you have a person assigned to project management. It's their responsibility to set up the structure and monitor the results. Ideally, they organize stoplight meetings once a month or a quarter where you review the progress with a green light, amber, or red light by each tactic. The creation of the plan was an opportunity to engage stakeholders. So after year one, you want to ensure you circle back to your stakeholders and share the good news of your success, the challenges, and possibly the failures. It's important to be transparent and acknowledge not everything went to plan. Ensure you tailor the message for each audience so it answers, WFM, what's in it for me? If you are proud of your plan, put it on your website. You'll be quite surprised and maybe shocked at how many people read it and download it. And it's a really good resource for your board so they can check it when they're rushing to the next board meeting.
All right, so finally, we call this presentation the strategic plan for the strategic plan. So we had to deliver. And this is the cheat sheet for everything that we have covered today. Now, you could make an argument that all 4 of these columns could be objectives under a single goal of design a strategic plan, but we would have a very vertical column, wouldn't have gotten on the screen. And so as a practical matter, we have listed it this way as 4 separate goals: plan and scan the environment, articulate culture, identify priorities, and implement strategy. And each has its own goal statements, objectives, tactics, and measurements.
So a couple of specific points. Communications of this process is vital. One of the very first things we mentioned in the presentation is the need to bring the entire constituency along for the ride. Even if they don't participate, they will have confidence in the process if you have given them an opportunity. You must be very specific in explaining why you are going through the process, what you want to achieve, and the role they can play. All your steps should be transparent and the final results communicated widely and freely.
Now, the actual working group that we talked about will be much smaller as the process gets more granular. You have to get the right people on the bus. You have to get their commitment to meet in person at a retreat. Joining by phone doesn't work. Seen there, been there, done that. If they can't be there in person, select another stakeholder who can be there. And obviously, a doodle poll, an online poll of some kind, or a survey on the date and location will be imperative.
This working group will have a lot of information to process. Data from the environmental scan, the relationships, the vision and mission, and statements, design thinking. Don't take your eye off the ball. This process started with a goal. It must end with goals.
And finally, as mentioned before, the strategic plan has a reputation for being created with a lot of fanfare, only to be placed on a shelf and never seen again. So here's how you keep that from happening. Make sure that every one of the tactics in your plan has a line item to your budget. Every organization has to formulate an annual budget. And when that time circles around each year, you'll be required to make judgments on continuing to fund that line item or replace it with something else. In this way, the strategic plan becomes a dynamic, living object contemplated each year in your budget, and hopefully at least monthly in a dashboard of your measurements. Another way to assure accountability is to designate a responsible party for each of your objectives. Not an area of your organization, but a specific staff member. That way, there is never confusion about who has ownership of an activity.
So we're going to stop there just quickly. We're very excited to have a question. So the question is, how long does an average strategic planning process take from discovery to implementation? It really depends on the organizational size and sometimes the imperative for the planning process. But in general, A pretty fast one would be 3 to 6 months, and generally you're going to see about 6 to 9 months. It's a lot of work, and it's just hard to get people organized and get the meeting set up when you're doing the discovery phase, get all the data you need, herding the cats to get the retreat, etc., and get everybody there. It's a lot of work, but it's definitely pays off, and it's a really good investment of time. So let's have a look at the pitfalls. Firstly, following our first webinar on the subject, we were asked to include some pitfalls, which really is just a reiteration of things we've already mentioned, but here's 9. So not getting support early from the people who matter. This includes the people who are part of the environmental scan and also the manner in which you conduct the retreat. A big part of it here is you often want to get an executive, I don't want to say request, but you want your executive of your organization to be requesting this, to be giving you the power to undertake this planning.
Number 2 is effective pre-planning. Did you adequately think through the people, for instance, who needed to be on that bus that we talked about? Did you plan for all of the discovery opportunities that were necessary?
Next up is failing to address and resolve current problems. Encourage your teams to document the trouble spots in real time as they move through their days. Take a long, hard look at the bottlenecks and obstacles that are bogging down your current system's productivity and efficiency. A SWOT may help. By coming to terms and working through your current problems first, you can now better lay the groundwork for success with your new strategic initiatives now and in the future. And this actually relates to the timing question, because if there are some big elephants under the rug or some big issues that need to be dealt with, that is going to affect your timing.
Next up is trying to do everything immediately. As we mentioned, it can be tempting to try to front load all of the action items into the first few months. But doing this, it really rarely works. The most effective plans are those which have realistic time and resource allocation.
Then developing mission, vision, value statements that lack substance. If these ultimate goals are not clear, what results will the strategic plan achieve, and no matter how well it's laid out?
Next up is that the plan doesn't emphasize accountability. The people doing the operational planning must understand from their teams what is actually required in the doing. In that way, to ensure realistic timelines are being set and adequate resources are being directed to a strategic initiative to ensure its achievement. This is why we believe the tactics should be articulated by the staff, and after that, the measurements should be attributed to the responsible staff member.
So next up is vague action steps. Without action steps, the big picture strategy is useless. To develop those steps, the team has to identify actions that are necessary to implement the strategy. For example, one element of a plan may be recognized as a thought leader in the intersection of economics and business. Well, that's an easy thing to claim. It's a useless strategy without something concrete to do so. So for one of my action steps below the strategies element is to write for Forbes.com 5 times a month. If your strategic plan fails to define what the management team does every day, then it needs good action steps.
Next up is failing to communicate broadly. You know the old saying, if the tree falls and no one is there to hear it, you know the rest. So everyone in your universe should be kept apprised of the process. Once the plan is complete, schedule regular updates with results of measurements.
Which leads us to not tracking progress effectively. As we mentioned, connecting the plan to the budget ensures that the priorities you set will be reviewed each year, but you should have a dashboard that allows you to see the progress incrementally, and again, ideally every month. Any questions? Please let your fingers do some typing there.
Well, finally, a little something about GG+A in our practice as we wait for some questions to come in. We're a team of 3, including the incredibly talented consulting associate Megan Williamson, who works out of our Chicago office. I am based on the East Coast. As I mentioned previously, Barney is based on the West Coast, so we are a very geographically balanced a team here in the U.S. Barney also has responsibility for the Asia Pacific region and Canada. and I have responsibility for Europe.
As balanced from the perspective of the clients we serve, here's a listing of the organizations that we've worked with over the last 6 years, and you'll see they span the globe. Constituent relations and philanthropy are worldwide interests, and GG+A is a worldwide consulting firm, so we're here to help.
Yep, I have a couple of alumni clients right now in Europe, personally. So we help our clients in many ways. Often it's a customized review of a alumni program that helps the organization understand how it stacks up against peers, which is helpful when you're lobbying for additional support from the people upstairs. And of course, as you would imagine, we provide strategic planning counsel.
Every aspect of our lives is measured these days, but constituent relations is just getting its arm around understanding how to quantify the work that we do. So our practice is knee-deep in the metrics conversation. Our work does not go out the door without some form of data component, and for that we turn to our talented analytics colleagues in the firm who design and conduct surveys and crunch data every imaginable way. We also provide ongoing counsel in addition to training and workshops. And finally, dual goal campaigns, which is something I've been involved with at a pair of institutions where we elevated non-monetary engagement goals right alongside the dollar goal.
And once again, since we spent so much time talking about the importance of mission, you can see our mission statement again there in the bottom left. At GG+A, our mission is advancing yours.
Terrific. Oh, there we go. The last minute question. We love it. Do you recommend strategic planning before an organization launches a capital campaign? If so, why? When might it not be necessary to do strategic planning before a capital campaign? So I think the big part there is if if there has been a strategic plan that is solid and is already underway, and then maybe, sometimes organizations, there might be a new president, they're announcing a quick capital campaign for something that isn't going to, fully impact the whole organization, then that might be the case. But it's usually really important to do it before a capital campaign, because ideally the capital campaign reflects the larger institutional strategic plan that has been done, and it is one of the tactics of that greater strategic plan. And then ideally each unit on campus, including alumni relations and development, but it might also be student services, or it might, if you're a non-academic environment, it might be the collections or what have you. They also have their plans that are in support of that master strategic plan, and thus everyone is doing their planning in support of the capital campaign. Because capital campaigns are awesome ways to knit together a lot of different interests across the whole university, and ideally try and get everyone sort of marching in the same direction for a specific period of time for a specific goal.
That's right. Almost every RFP that we see for strategic planning in some form or fashion, it requires, or it's asking the council to help the organization strengthen in our case, the alumni volunteerism with key institutional objectives, right? Whatever that is. And generally, if you have a capital campaign, some sort of comprehensive campaign coming up, in the advancement arena, there is nothing that will be more important to the institution than that. So clearly that's a time that you want a strategic plan that aligns the alumni energy with the campaign that's about to be launched. In fact, we are creating a proposal as we speak for a very prominent private institution here in the United States for that very reason. They have a campaign that they've been working on. They're going to be launching it soon. They want the alumni strategic plan to be in concert with institutional priorities, and clearly the capital campaign will be one of them.
Absolutely. So thank you very much for participating. We'll follow up with an email, and we'll get a link to this presentation if you want to come back to it for any reason. And please don't hesitate to reach out if we can assist you in any way, and even if you just have questions. The meter doesn't have to be running. We always love to talk about ideas and help problem solve. So if we can ever be of use, please let us know.
Barney, what dates are you going to be out in the Asia Pacific region?
In the Asia Pacific Conference is in Brisbane, and that is from April 8th to I think the 12th. and we'll then be in Perth just after that for a couple of days. And also, and because I'm flying from LA, it's easy to stop in Hong Kong or Singapore or anywhere else on the way. So if we can be of any assistance, please don't hesitate to let us know.
That's great. Our thanks to Griffin Croft, who's manning Mission Control there in Chicago, Illinois. Amy Parker listening in Hong Kong, and to everybody who took the time to tune in this morning or this afternoon, depending where you are at. It's been our pleasure here at Grenzebach, Glier & Associates, and don't hesitate to reach out when we can be of assistance to you. A very pleasant good morning or good afternoon or even good evening here in the United States.
All right. Thanks again. Take care.